So a couple of years ago during COVID, I was doom scrolling HBO Max back when people still called it HBO and not Max. Or maybe it is still HBO, I don't know. Who cares? Companies are buying and owning everything now and renaming shit, but whatever. While doom scrolling, I was looking for something to watch and I stumbled on this show that I thought was underrated called Barry. I watched the first episode not thinking much. I honestly just thought it was going to be a straightforward comedy because the main lead was Bill Hader, but I was pretty surprised to see that it was much more. I feel like not enough people talked about Barry when it came out. They know it's out, but somehow the show just slipped under the radar for a lot of people, and I think that's kind of a crime. Like, everybody still talks about The Sopranos still being one of the best prestige dramas of the decade, and Barry's just sitting quietly in the corner being one of the most psychological, complex, emotionally devastating pieces of TV that I've ever seen.
The fuck was that for?
So I wanted to dig into why Barry hits so hard, and I think it comes down to two things that TV usually never really talks about, or at least gets right, and that's loneliness and depression. Not the Hollywood version of those things, the real version, the quiet, hollow, everyday version that most of us actually live with. Now, there is going to be spoilers throughout the video, even though all 4 seasons have been out for a minute. If you haven't watched Barry, I'd suggest you go watch it. Seriously, it's really worth the watch. But before we get into that, I wanted to get into what Barry actually is. Barry is the HBO show that ran from 2018 to 2023, created by Alec, Berg, and Bill Hader, who also clearly stars in the lead role. On the surface, the pitch sounds like a dark comedy. A hitman from Cleveland goes to LA to kill someone and accidentally ends up in an acting class and decides he wants to be an actor. Which does sound funny, and it is seriously uncomfortably funny at times, but the premise is really just the wrapper around something much heavier. Barry Bergman is a man who spent his entire adult life doing terrible things. He's killed people, and I mean a lot of people. And the show doesn't let him or us forget that. But what makes Barry so unique is that while interested in whether Barry is a good guy or not, it also is interested in something more uncomfortable than that. It's what it feels like to be completely empty inside and desperately wanting to be something else while being fundamentally unable to change. That's the show. That's what we're here for. Now let's paint a picture of what Barry's life is like at the start of the show. He wakes up alone. He does a job, goes back to being alone. He has one friend, which is his handler, Fuchs, who's pretty much just using him. He has no hobbies, no relationships, no passions. He describes himself at one point as just going through the motions, existing without really living. And then he walks to the acting class and something changes. Now here's what the show does that's so smart. It doesn't frame the acting class as Barry's redemption arc. It frames it as Barry finally feeling something for the first time in years, maybe ever. He's around people who are openly emotional, who are encouraged to be vulnerable, who see each other. And at this point, Barry is starving for that. The loneliness in this show isn't about being physically alone. Barry is around people constantly. It's about being unseen. It's about performing a version of yourself for so long that you forget there's anything underneath. Gene Kushner's acting becomes, for Barry, a place where he's asked to actually feel something real, and it terrifies him because the moment you start to feel things, you have to reckon with what you've done. There's this idea in psychology called emotional unavailability. It's when somebody has shut down their emotional inner life, usually as a coping mechanism, to the point where they literally can't access their own feelings. They know something's wrong, they know something is missing, but they can't name it. Barry is a walking portrait of that. He doesn't know how to say, "I'm lonely." He doesn't have a language for it, so instead he chases the thing that made him feel less alone. The acting class and Sally. The idea of becoming someone new without ever being able to express why. And that honestly is just so fucking real to me, man. So many people rock around like that. Not dramatically lonely, just quietly disconnected from themselves, from other people, from any sense of meaning. Barry just happens to be a hitman, you know? Which obviously adds some complications. Alright, let's talk about depression and why the show gets it right as a theme. Well, Barry might be the most honest portrayal of depression I've seen on TV in a really long time, and it does it mostly without ever using the word. Depression in movies and TV usually look like one thing: someone rotting in bed, or crying, shedding a silent tear, or screaming, or whatever. Unable to function, dramatic music swelling, you know the deal. And one version of depression, but in Barry, it's not the most common one. The most common version looks like Barry. You get up, you do your thing, you say the right words at the right time, you go through the routine, and somewhere underneath all of that is this gray, flat nothing. This sense of what's the point? This disconnection from your own life, like you're watching it happen from someone else. Bill Hader plays this with such specificity. It's almost uncomfortable to watch a lot. There's something behind Barry's eyes that never fully lights up, even in his happiest moments. There are a few, always, but there's this undertone pulling him back down. And the show is very deliberate about why Barry is the way he is. It's not just he's sad, it's that Barry has constructed an entire identity around being useful to other people as a weapon. His self-worth is completely tied to his ability to kill. When that's taken away, or when he tries to walk away from it, he has absolutely nothing left. No sense of self, no foundation. Now let's talk about Sally Reed, because she's doing her own version of all this, and I don't think she gets enough credit. Sally is an actress, ambitious, talented, and wounded deeply from an abusive relationship, and throughout the series she uses her craft of acting, storytelling, and performing as a way to process her trauma, or at least that's what she tells herself. There's a storyline in season 2 where Sally develops a show based on her past abusive relationship, and she makes a choice to change the ending to make herself look stronger than she was, to show that standing up to her abuser in a way she didn't actually do in real life. And when the real version comes out, she's met finally with the true story on stage. It's one of the most raw and vulnerable moments in the whole series, and it gets almost no response. The audience doesn't know what to do with real pain. That itself is such a sharp observation about how we consume trauma narratives. We want a healed ending. We want that triumphant ending. Real and messy and unresolved, we look away uncomfortably. Sally's loneliness is different from Barry's, but just as deep. She's surrounded by people and constantly performing connections, but nobody actually knows her. They know the version of her she's chosen to present, and she keeps that version very polished, so defended that she barely knows herself anymore either. By the end of the series, the parallels between Sally and Barry become almost tragic and interconnected. Two people who desperately wanted to be seen, who found each other but were too broken and too defended to actually see each other. I wanted to spend a minute on Gene, because he's one of the most underappreciated characters in the show. Henry Winkler plays Gene Cousineau, the acting teacher, and he actually won an Emmy for it, rightfully so. But what gets me about Gene is how the show uses him to explore a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of someone who was once important and no longer is. Gene had his moment. He was on the edge of real success, real recognition, and it passed him by. Now he teaches acting classes to students who may or may not become anything, and he performs the role of wise mentor while quietly being kind of a fucking mess. He's vain and needy. He makes everything about himself, and those traits, which could just make him a comic character, becoming heartbreaking once you understand where they come from. Gene has built his entire ego around being seen as a great artist and teacher. Take that away, and there's not a lot left. His relationship with Barry becomes its own twisted way, one of the most intimate relationships either of them has. Gene sees something in Barry, something genuine and raw, before he knows what Barry actually is, and even after he finds out, even after everything, that connection keeps pulling him at him. The show is asking us, can people who are fundamentally alone actually connect, or are they just gravitating towards each other's loneliness and calling it love? This is some pretty heavy shit for a show that has some of the best action sequences I've ever seen. Holy. Since I just geeked out about the action, I wanted to talk how the show looks, because I think it's intentional. Barry doesn't look like most TV. It's not cinematic or lush. It's not that golden HBO way. A lot of the time it looks almost flat and overlit. The colors in Barry's world, especially in season 1 and 2, they're kind of muted, but in a way that's meaningful. Beige, gray, and fluorescent. And then occasionally in moments of violence, in moments of Barry's imagination, like flashbacks to war, the visuals suddenly become almost operatic, heightened, and even beautiful. The contrast is pretty deliberate, and the everyday world that Barry inhabits looks like the inside of depression. It's flat and colorless, going through the motions, and the only time his world gets interesting is when he's in the middle of something terrible, which is itself a comment on depression and trauma. How people who've lived in chronic emptiness can sometimes only feel alive during crisis or conflict, because at least that's something to feel. Season 4 takes this even further in ways I don't want to fully spoil, but the visual storytelling gets genuinely experimental in a way that I don't think any other network show would have attempted. I know the ending of Barry divided people. I've seen the takes. It was bleak or unearned. They should have ended it differently. And I do get it, but I want to push back just a little bit. The ending of Barry is doing something really specific. It's reusing to give us this catharsis we've been conditioned to expect. Barry does not get redemption. He does not become a better person. He does not escape the consequences of who he is and what he's done. And that's actually the most honest thing the show could ever do. Given everything it spent 4 seasons saying about depression and identity. Because here's the thing, real change, the deep structural kind, the identity level kind, is incredibly rare. And it almost never comes from wanting to change. It comes from years of work, support, and reckoning. Barry doesn't do that work. He keeps trying to skip to the end to his new life to try to reset, without actually confronting what he is. The show knows this and it doesn't let him off the hook. That's what I like about it. What we're left with is something honestly rare in TV, a tragedy that earns its ending, a story about a man who could not become who he wanted to be, not because the world wouldn't let him, but because he never truly faced himself. That's not just hopeless, it's honest. The show about a hitman who wants to be an actor that somehow became one of the sharpest, most emotionally intelligent portraits of loneliness and depression that I've ever seen. And it kind of just slipped by. 4 seasons, then gone. Which maybe is fitting for a show about people who feel invisible.